And I'm thinking, well, if we imagined, and you can draw the usual kind of railroad or transport analogy, if you like, into this, but did we think that we were in the business of just producing journals or journal papers, when in reality we're actually in the business of scholarly communication, and we missed something there, as there was an opportunity to sort of occupy this space, which we maybe forgot because we were too focused on something that was possibly a historical business model. I can see Grace smiling broadly about this. Maybe you'd like to answer out that one first, and then we'll go round.
I think publishers did miss a trick, and I think that scholarly collaboration networks, to me, have really, perhaps inadvertently, identified and met two unmet needs. So one is really enabling discovery of content based on what their peers and people they respect are interested in. And that's something that publishers have been trying to do in terms of providing discovery and alerting services, but perhaps haven't nailed yet. And then I think the second thing, and I would recast it as managing reputation, but scientists, I think, increasingly, or researchers increasingly, are using scholarly collaboration networks as kind of their LinkedIn. So really to manage their reputation and to get feedback, and that clearly is an unmet need that these collaboration networks are successfully meeting. I would like to think it's not too late for us to play our part in that, but I think we did miss a trick.
Okay, I'm going to put this to you next, Charlie. I mean, because managing reputation, I think, falls into the focus of your organisation. What would you say to that?
I think it's not that publishers have missed a trick, it's that as individual organisations, it's not easy to take that trick, to win that trick. Is it a card-playing analogy or a magician's analogy? I'm never quite sure. But it's not easy to win that trick when you are operating as separate organisations. What researchers need here is a cross-publisher solution, and that's why the scholarly collaboration networks have been so effective, because like LinkedIn and like other things, everyone can use it, it's a universally available thing, and you can manage your entire reputation in one place, and that's what they want to do. So we haven't, as individual publishers, missed any tricks. Maybe there would have been an opportunity to create a shared service sponsored by publishers, a little bit like there have been latterly some more shared publisher initiatives like the STM work, and perhaps we could have started earlier on envisioning the need for this and thinking about how to service that need collaboratively ourselves. I don't think it is too late for publishers to do that, but the challenge is that the business of publishing is different to the business of reputation management. Why the scholarly collaboration networks have been so successful is because they do something very simple, and only that, really. And latterly they've started to build additional bits of functionality around the edges. But researchers entirely understood what they were for, and so signing up for it is a straightforward task. Publishers obviously do something very different. To find a way of diversifying and also offering this kind of capability is going to be a challenge for branding and for business positioning as much as for technology or for engagement.
Okay, so there are some good points in there about collaboration, which I think, as an industry, we have a history of strong collaboration actually between publishers, but this is a bigger topic and something that is, you're right, it's kind of quite thorny in the sense that being able to where do individual brands sit within something that's designed to kind of transcend the silos that we're all creating. Kent, do you have an input on this?
Well, I think that it's not surprising that it took an insurgent movement to put all of our content into a bin that we wouldn't do ourselves. We had, when I was at New England Journal of Medicine, we talked about and created a community hub, and we thought about, well, should we let people post content? We thought, well, that will be rude to have them posting articles from these other medical journals on our, that's just not appropriate. That's crossing boundaries that we shouldn't cross. But so it took an insurgent to show us that, yeah, actually you can bend those rules and create some services that we as individual publishers can't make.
So Hanfried, I'm going to put this to you now, as you with some unique experience there with Mendeley. Tell us the Elsevier perspective.
Well, since we're supposed to wake up people, I'm going to disagree a little bit with Charlie. I think we publishers have been in the business of communication. We haven't missed the trick. All our business, all what we do is communications. In that sense, we are in the same business as the scholarly sharing networks. And I think we're also in the reputation management. That's why we came up with the impact factor. That is the single most expression of reputation, A, of the journal, and B, of the person who publishes in the journal. And that makes or breaks tenure. Of course, I think the key here is that we were also busy managing the transition to the internet, and we have managed that well. There was a recent headline in the Financial Times saying Elsevier, the business that the internet could not kill. And I'm not saying this to showcase Elsevier's prowess in managing the transition to the internet, but I think all publishers could be put there. Any Wiley, Springer, they all managed the transition to the internet really well. We were busy doing that, though, and we missed a little bit, maybe, the transition to the social dimension of the internet. And again, coming back to the impact factor, we put that in place because we wanted to tell everyone once and for all, this is the reputation that's attached to this journal. Of course, it changes once in a while, but it's relatively static. The social component of the internet makes this a completely fluid thing. The reputation goes up and down all the time, whether or not there's many likes or not. Facebook like spoken. So there is a much more fluid and interactive business now in scholarly communication that we're not used to, and we need to adapt to that. And therefore the impact factor is possibly losing a little bit of its allure and its importance, and other impact factors as measured by ResearchGate, as measured by academia.edu are going to be more important.
Okay, and Fred?
Well, let's go back to your original question, did we miss a trick? I would say we have, with the popularity of the 3 largest networks, and the industry has a long habit of developing cross-industry collaborations. Look at what Crossref has done for us and for all our stakeholders. But there are examples of some of these networks that operate entirely within the sustainability realm that we're worried about. Social Science Research Network has been around since the early 90s. It works perfectly in concert with social science publishers. There are networks that started primarily with exchanging metadata, so EndNote from Reuters, the ReadCube and Figshare applications from Digital Science. These were started by publishers, and they're very popular. They don't get the notoriety that the big 3 have. Anytime something like this happens, I think we can learn from it, improve our own ability to deliver services to our customers. And the hope of everyone on the STM panel, including my 2 collaborators, is that we will forge a collaborative relationship with network owners, independent of publishers or owned by publishers, because it'll strengthen their products if we can work together, and we will provide stronger services to our shared customer base. Now that sounds very optimistic, but I've spent my time in the publishing community forging collaborations, and in the end I find this community very collaborative.
So, I mean, there's probably one other thing that we're going to round out this issue, but I think there's an interesting analogy here that we could draw, which is, you know, if you think about the difference between Google and Facebook, you know, Google for a long time thought it was in the business of indexing the world's content, and then with the growth of social networks and with the growth of Facebook, it became very apparent that they'd missed a kind of key dimension, which was all of the people that interact with the content. And I think there's an interesting parallel here too, in a sense that, you know, we could have, you know, and maybe we've addressed this a little bit already, but we could have become, you know, more obsessed with the content and less focused on the kind of interactions around the content. And that's something that I think, you know, the big challenge there is about how we collaborate cross-publisher, because without a doubt, you know, what I hear is when individuals are interacting with content, they're focused paradoxically on the content side. They're much less interested in brand per se. They're interested in finding the content that's relevant to a particular line of inquiry across multiple different platforms. And that's actually, I think, there's a challenge there which we need to rise to as an industry in order to facilitate that transition between silos and allowing sharing between, effectively between those different environments in as transparent a way as possible.
Let me mention two other examples that we missed. The two largest social networks that our community is involved with, we haven't mentioned yet. One is LinkedIn. Many of you are probably LinkedIn members, and so it was, for the most part, a profile building network, and you make connections. And the largest content sharing network in the world is Dropbox. There are billions of documents, including probably most of our articles sitting in Dropbox accounts. So here's an organization that allowed sharing of any digital content well. It's huge, it's successful. Here's an organization that allowed social interactions and profile information. And the networks we're talking about now are a nice meld of those things. And so we fail to see how useful and popular that melding would be to our researchers.
Any questions from the audience at this point? I didn't see any hands go up. We have one at the back there.
Two. Good.
Hi, Phil Jones from Digital Science. The community.
Hope you like that plug, Phil.
Do I have to stand up, do I? So the community in this that's most difficult to engage with is, of course, the most important one, the researchers. So moving forward, how do we engage them in this discussion to make sure the kinds of solutions that we're developing are going to work for them and that they're going to buy into them so that we don't lose them to the insurgent influences, as Kent calls them?
Well, let's say we've had an open consultation where anyone could contribute. I think we've had very little direct input from a researcher. All of us in the room who are publishers have some very important contacts in that community called our editors. And so I think that's probably the first point of outreach that the publishing community should take advantage of, because they're on the front line between the research community, who are our authors, and their very important job as intermediary to us. And that's one way we could do that. Perhaps the panel has other suggestions.
I think I'm sorry. I think that's a really important question, because we as Richard went through his slides and said, okay, here are all the stats and information we have that we have to take with a large grain of salt. We don't have that grain of salt. We don't have any offsetting data or research to say this is actually what's going on, what they think of it, what level of interaction, what number of those 40 million are active users, et cetera, et cetera. So.
But there is some data available around that, which was what helpfully I was about to jump in with, so we're nicely timed there. Of the, let's say, ResearchGate, of that 40 million is, I think, about 8 million. 1% of those are actually active with the Q&A, which is the sort of supposedly the primary function of the site. We, as publishers, have much more active and engaged researchers among our authors, for example, as well as our editors. And so we actually already have a more active community, and if in aggregate, it's a bigger community as well. We already have all the ingredients we need to make a success of this. We just have to figure out what the recipe is and what we want to pursue. And part of that is understanding, as we all do, that publishing is only a little microcosm of the process for researchers. Whatever we do mustn't be too content-oriented, because while they do use things like ResearchGate to share content, actually most people, if you talk to them as individuals, will say, yeah, I'm really just on there to have a profile because I kind of feel that I must be seen to be there, not that I'm really getting any value from it, and not that I'm necessarily, most of them would be happy just to list their work. They don't necessarily want to upload PDFs, it's just that is what ResearchGate forces them to do. And I mean, I speak sort of broadly for other networks a bit there as well. So I think if we can understand a bit more about what they do find valuable across the full spectrum of their reputation management at all different stages, their teaching as well. You know, ResearchGate, again, to pick on that, is so research-oriented that it is cutting out an enormous swathe of its potential audience. We're already connected into those other members of that audience. There's so much more we could do if we thought about that spectrum of their mentoring or of their events, and a lot of us will know the events that these people are at and we'll be connecting them there. So there's a real opportunity to provide a much broader service than any of these other things. And again, I guess I just come back to that challenge of being very clear what that service is, because the danger is to try and do too much and not be clearly doing anything and not gain traction. But I think we do have the access we need to the people who'd value it, and we do have good relationships with them.
But Charlie, is that the discussion that Google had when they said, let's start our own social network?
I'd love to know the discussion that Google had when they decided to
Because
start
we
their
may not
social
be able to execute that as well because of all the mindsets and impediments and the fact that we're not insurgents. That's my inherent
But
question,
exactly,
and
that's why
they didn't do it well.
It's not necessarily for publishers to execute it, it's to figure out what we think is a good idea and find the right people to execute
I
it.
think the additional challenge is that anecdotally, we think we know that researchers don't care much about principles of sharing. They just do it and implicitly assume that it's probably okay, maybe not, but no one is going to come after me. And so I'll just do it, but I'm not really that interested in learning about principles or adhering to principles or signing up to principles. It's a principled thing to do, and that's kind of boring. So you need to actually get to the researcher with something that's seemingly, or we need to dress it up as it being interesting and relevant to them, and explain why copyright compliant, I think that's the big elephant in the room, copyright compliant sharing is actually in their interest as well, as much as it is in our publisher's interest.
There's one other thing before we move on to another question that that I don't want to lose track of, and that was something that was said about the value of these potentially, which is the ability to search across a lot of everything. And we need to pay attention to that. That may be a missed opportunity already for us, because you look at where our users are generally searching. They're already bypassing our sites. They're going to meta searches. And we don't have a solution generally to that. So there's another solution buried in here.
Okay, so I'm going to... Anthony, go on then.
Point of information. Okay. Anthony Watkinson's Cyber Research. Our group and Carol Tenepe's group have been doing research called Beyond Downloads for Mendeley, Elsevier, and some bits of it are coming out. We did look closely at what people were doing with ResearchGate, and it's very complicated. I can't even start to describe it. However, if you Google Tenepe, you may find an article has come out. I'm not sure yet. The only thing I know has come out is in Library Connect, Elsevier's thing for libraries. But it is quite interesting work. I was a very minor cog, so I can say that.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next question. Thank you, Anthony, because we're going to be in danger otherwise of running out of time. So here's one that we might get a little bit exercised about. One of the things that I've heard at least one of the CEOs of the big three networks saying is, that they want to start publishing. And if you think about that for a second, that could be quite it could be quite an unsettling idea in many ways. One of the sort of most powerful kind of aspects, I alluded to this earlier, of kind of internet business is scale. If you've built scale, if you've built a huge number of eyeballs, then you can leverage that in a number of different ways. Now, obviously, the kind of principal way that these networks are leveraging that scale at the moment is through advertising. But to suddenly step into the role of a publisher, if you've got that many researchers on board already, would it make sense? I suppose is the question I'd ask straight away. I mean, does that make sense? Well, obviously, the Elsevier dimension will be an interesting input to this too. But Ken, what's your view?
For them to start publishing, if I were them, I'd think about it. Absolutely. Why not? You've got an audience, you've got a tool set, you've got an interesting value proposition. Why not?
So, Humphrey, there's this synergy there, clearly, from your perspective, I would have thought.
There is, and I think we publishers need to catch up with this trend. There's no doubt about it. And I think the key question is, do you start with the eyeballs you have in the community that you have, as the ResearchGates and the academias would, and then add the content, or you start with the content and then add the community to it? Of course, our approach at Elsevier is that it does all root in the content and the substance of the matter, and then you allow the interaction, the social dimension to revolve around that. I think it also, the notion that they could just do this, and I'm going to just put words in your mouth that you claimed that they could, it comes also from the fact that people still, this is the question I, as head of communications, get all the time: what do you still do, you publishers? You don't really do anything. You don't add value. I can just put my stuff on the internet. So it's a misconception about the publishing process, and I think you talked about this yesterday, didn't you? Where people thought that with the advent of the internet, it was so much easier and less involved. And we need to do a better job in communicating how hard this is. And if ResearchGates and academia and the others want to start their own publishing business, I welcome them as competitors. I don't think they would be particularly good at it, frankly, but let them try. And let's see how easy or not that is. I think they will find out, just as PLOS ONE is finding out now. It's pretty hard, and it's not that easy to do it sustainably.
If I could just add one thing to that, which is that I think that absolutely scholarly collaboration networks could, and in fact we're already seeing them experimenting with peer review. The advantage in some ways, the disadvantage they have is they're not publishers. The advantage they have is they're not publishers. So they're not bound by a process that's based on print that we have translated to digital, and actually can pick out the bits of the scholarly collaboration, scholarly communication, filtering, quality control process that researchers actually value now, and figure out how to do it from a digital first perspective. So I think we should watch very closely.
3 quick points. One, I guess I understand the context of why you would ask that question, but it is quite a solipsistic question. It's assuming that publishing is the thing they might consider valuable enough to focus on. Whereas actually, I think, certainly again, if you talk to researchers, they'll say, well, actually, as many people view my slideshows, or more people view my slideshows than view my articles, I think research collaboration networks might sort of potentially bypass publishing and look at other ways of supporting communication. Another point is that if they did, let's assume they do decide to do publishing, on the evidence so far of what those services do, it's not innovative enough to really reinvent the wheel. So they might decide to do publishing, but whether they will really take the opportunity to reinvent publishing as a digital first thing, the evidence isn't currently there to suggest that that's how they think. Final point is just that the research networks we're looking at today could be the MySpaces and Bebos of this environment. We might not yet see the real innovators, and they might be yet to emerge.
Okay.
As a former researcher, the huge hurdle they would have to overcome is the reputation of the journal. They're cross-publisher, interdisciplinary, and so if a young researcher says, as he or she marches up to the dean, here's my publication on RG1 or RG2. What's that? We really want an article in Nature. Okay.
But not if it's, here's the RG score of how many people read it and cited it. You know, they could so quickly recreate that.
Yes, that's a big if, though. You're dealing with an academic community that is very inertial and very resistant to changing their criteria.
Okay, here's another one that I think we need to just address as well. I mean, there's so many interesting questions around this topic. It's kind of, we're going to have to pick and choose a little bit. Is there a risk that the kind of idea of this of open access and content sharing can somehow become mixed up and conflated? Grace, do you want to kick us off on that one?
Yeah, well, I can speak from somewhat painful experience actually. So December 2014, Nature Publishing Group introduced a content sharing experiment where we enabled, working with ReadCube, we enabled researchers to get a shareable link of an article if they had full text access and share it with anybody, so to share it with individuals. We saw virtually no abuse, but what we did see, which really surprised us, was that people, one, thought that we were claiming that this was open access, and it's a read-only PDF, so it's definitely not open access. You can't text or data mine it. We had concerns about DRM application. And one of the things that perhaps surprised me the most was that some open access supporters saw it as moving away from our liberal self-archiving policy, which was something we absolutely didn't mean. And so we were forced to very quickly clarify that we weren't saying this was open access, and we definitely weren't moving away from open access towards this kind of sharing.
Does anybody else?
Seems to point to potentially a confusion between a business model and an action. Open access is a business model, and so subscription and sharing is an activity. So these are not the same, and one shouldn't and cannot confuse them. So sharing is something that you do within limits, within the, again, I emphasize the copyright limits. And then there's business models, and they evolve as well, but their sharing is not a business model. That's, the sharing economy is still an economy. Still someone needs to pay for it, and that still needs to be in place.
We had to address this question very explicitly in that web page you see up there, and you'll see our answer. That seemed to quiet down a lot of the discussion once it was very clear we were talking about sharing of subscription content, and that open access content is dealt with because it's already open access. And these networks are perfectly within their means to share that content if it's open access, or the metadata if it's not.
I don't know how many researchers we have in the audience, but I'd love to ask them that question, because while I don't disagree with anything any of us have said, I think it might all be semantics from a researcher perspective, whether I'm sharing something that is open access, and sure, that might be the goal, but if I'm sharing something, I'm sharing something. I'm not sure. I think we might find that's a distinction that is meaningful only to us, and actually, the more we try and cling to it, the more confusion we are creating. It's not really... It's kind of oblivious to what researchers actually want and need, creating that distinction, perhaps.
I think that maybe that's the point that I was driving at, Charlie, because in a way you see some of the communication that comes out of the for example, from ResearchGate or academia, and there's almost possibly a willful kind of desire to blend the things together in a way that says this is about function. The function is sharing, and the idea is you share openly, and so we're very clear about what the difference is. But I think you're right that and the problem with that is that when if you subvert the idea, then very quickly you start to kind of subvert the kind of careful model that we've actually put together ourselves.
Well, you have to also appreciate the buzzword of the era is open, like E used to be, and now it's open, so they're going to use it.
Yeah, we could throw Agile in the mix too, and that might
yeah,
we
open
could,
and Agile.
join in. But you're right, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna. Arno's now quite rightly drawing to my attention that we need to start to wrap up. I'm going to ask for one or possibly two questions from the audience because I know you've been very silent, and I promised that you would get involved. I see a hand in the middle.
Hi, Luisa Gaggini from Casalini Libri. One of the reasons why there is this sort of confusion, I think, between DRM and scholarly sharing is that library contracts, actually licenses, usually requires to specify to vendors, to, I suppose, even to publishers, if the content which is licensed can be scholarly shared. And therefore, I think that potentially the confusion comes out there, that in the libraries, the two concepts are just together. The libraries want to know if the content can be shared, if the content can be downloaded, putting everything together into the licensing documents.
That's an excellent question.
I'm sorry.
Let me just comment on that one. The policies that we would bury in a license agreement were often far from clear on this point, far from open and transparent and written in simple language, let alone the language that publishers would put on their websites for an author to read. And as we know, most authors don't read that anyway, but if they would, you'd like it to be very simple, open, and transparent. And so one of the most important things that have happened from this STM exercise is that 6 major publishers have made their language easily findable on their website and very clear and specifically mentions what an author can or cannot do in a situation as these networks. Hopefully that'll drift back into the licensing agreements too.
One extension on this, I don't know if anyone saw this yesterday, but Rick Anderson, no relation, published a post on the Scholarly Kitchen about the New York Public Library making all sorts of public domain documents available at no charge, no barrier, no nothing. But he commented on how academic libraries themselves have created policies that around public domain documents that don't actually treat them as public domain documents. They protect them almost reflexively. And so I think one of the side effects of this discussion could be for those libraries to also look at all the public domain materials they have, and maybe they need to free those up as well so that, again, we aren't creating barriers where there don't need to be any.
And I took one more question from the audience.
Thanks.
A short one.
A short one. What strikes me is that we make this distinction between publishing and sharing. Not only that we look at our business, we look at their business. Well, there have been some crossovers in the discussion. But isn't sharing also something that authors expect from us? Isn't the term publishing not just referring to a craft, which we all know a lot about, but also to the fact that they want us to make those things public? And of course, I take the point of subscription business, but we've had talks yesterday. We were reminded again by John Sack, and there was an excellent case study at the last SDM meeting in Frankfurt by Roger Schoenfeld about even subscribed users who have problems to get access to content when they're trying to read it off-site. Aren't we also sort of driving people by closing up our content to those places? Then they just go there, they find the illegally placed copy there, and then they find so many more things that they bypass us because we are not doing a good job in making things public even within the boundaries of our subscriptions. Thank you.
So have we been too closed?
Well, I think, I don't know about that particularly. I think one of the most encouraging things that's coming out of this on the technical side is the ability to actually get data on the sharing. One thing that I know at least one publisher, and you might think about this for yourselves, that didn't have, prior to this, any really useful metadata on the PDFs that they publish. And so when they showed up on scholarly collaborative networks, there was no way to track where they came from, what their provenance was, and so on and so forth. I think the technical group is going to help solve that. But this is a long-standing question. You know, what is the pass-along readership in print? Now, what's the sharing readership? And publishers should get credit for that. Libraries should get credit for that and see those data because it'll be very interesting to people.
To the question, I would certainly say that publishing and sharing is two sides of the same coin. They need to be seen together, and it is our job to enable sharing and to allow the scholarly process to happen. And as you or Fred pointed out, it's been happening for centuries in a different way, and now we have a new sharing economy, and we need to adapt to that, and we need to get better at allowing this. I remember Roger's talk as well at the SDM conference in Frankfurt, which was scarily entertaining. It was all about how you couldn't really get access even if you were entitled to the access. But I think what we demand of, we publishers demand of the ResearchGates and academias and of Mendeley, is that you share and allow sharing, enable sharing as much as is legally allowed and possible. You should, everyone should have that benefit of sharing, but you have to do it within the confines of the copyright. I think that's a key message, and that everyone, I think you should think in a legally based system that we all mostly operate in, should be understood. And to some extent, some of these scholarly sharing networks don't seem to understand that or don't seem to be playing by those rules.
Yeah, I think the elephant in the room is there's no risk currently for the sharing networks. And that's a concern. When you can just leverage up an economy with no risk or a business, that's not really a business. There has to be risk in a business.
I think it comes back actually to, I'm thinking of the Max Planck talk yesterday from Ralph, and also to Hunfried's point earlier that we focused very much in the digital era on the technical transition that was required. We kind of didn't think through the social and cultural transition that was required alongside that. And we've still got this challenge of actually, should we be trying to flip our business models so that we really can embrace what researchers want communication to be?
Okay, with that, I'm afraid this topic is tremendously important, and we undoubtedly will probably continue talking about this all day. So thank you, panelists, and thank you, audience, for participating. And I'm afraid we need to move on with the rest of the exciting program today.